Welcome back to Motivators podcast. Today I am joined by a very special guest, someone that I'm really excited to get to know better, someone who has an incredible experience and knowledge to share with everybody. Amazing Ashleigh Lewis. Hi Ashley, how are you?
Hi. Oh, thank you.
I'm very good.
I'm
So
doing
guys, if you
great.
don't know, you will know about Brown
Fabulous.
Behavorista. You will know about Ashleigh Lewis. She is growing like she's escalating like a rocket. She's growing. This is going to be a person that you want to definitely get to know. And at Motivity, we are very, very happy to, have the opportunity to have this platform to speak with Ashley today about classroom management and be able to have, the opportunity of having you here with us, Ashley. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you joining us. So I would say we would jump right in
Thank you.
if you're okay with it. Great. So
Yeah,
we would love to
absolutely.
know a
I'm
little bit
super
about your
excited.
journey in ABA, first of all, and then what led you to specialize in classroom management.
Oh, that's a really good question. So I started off as a classroom teacher, fresh out of college. I was kind of exploring career paths, and I fell upon a job posting for a middle school classroom. I had no experience
Okay.
in education prior to that. My undergrad degree is actually
Oh,
in
wow.
exercise science, which is hilarious. But I ended up in the classroom, yeah. And for the first couple years, I worked as a special educator. I worked with children with mild intellectual disabilities and also moderate intellectual disabilities. And I kind of worked my way through elementary school. I actually was not afforded the opportunity to learn about ABA until I was
Wow.
probably 4 or 5 years into education. Yeah, so it kind of fell on my lap. I fell in love with ABA through a behavior training that
Hmm.
I did for the school that I work for. And then I grew into a leadership position with my
Wow.
district as a behavior coach because apparently I was great at classroom management. um, so here we are years later. I've kind of bridged the gap between education. I work right now in a clinical setting, but my heart has always been in the classroom, in education. So
I love
that's where
that.
my primary passion
It's
comes
crazy to me,
from.
like, because I always say this, but ABA feels so big because we obviously exist in this world of behavior analysis, but it's very interesting and especially comes into conversation that we'll have later on about multidisciplinary, but a lot of people don't know of ABA, and I'm actually super surprised that it took you 5 years to as an active teacher to have that land on your lap.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, of course, I had students who,
Hmm.
had a diagnosis of autism, and I'm quite sure some of them probably received ABA therapy. So I was, of course, taken back when I started learning more about, okay, this is the world of ABA and the interventions, and I'm like, oh, I do this every day. Now there's just a label, a name to
So
it.
from
So
your
absolutely
BCBA
agree.
perspective, what do you think is something that people often misunderstand about classroom behavior management?
I think one thing that
Hmm.
people fail to understand is that it's not just a one time shot that works for everybody. Classroom management is composed of
Hmm.
different types of interventions, right? Different strategies and ways to connect with your
Yeah.
students. And it looks different across students and classrooms and ages. And so there's not just a, wave your wand in the air and boom, I have good classroom
Yeah, you need
management.
to
It
get
takes
to know the
time, it's a
people,
process.
obviously. So one of the
Absolutely.
things that
Absolutely.
I find interesting, and it's one of the things I wanted to ask you is obviously with your whole journey, what is one lesson that you've learned in your work that has shaped how you approach behavior management in the classroom?
I would probably say that
Hmm.
the relationship that you build with your students is what's most important. I feel like at one point when I was really starting off, I felt like it was about, following your IEP to, a T and making sure, of course, that all of these interventions are in place. But I ultimately realized that it was about the relationship and the rapport that I built with my kids. And that's where the classroom management starts with. And we'll talk more about why that is like the first
Hmm.
step to
It's so
creating an
important. Like
inclusive
rapport
environment
is
for
so
all.
important. Like in all aspects of our life, right? Like I think in all our relationships that we have with friends, partners, family, but like building rapport, especially in this type of environment, I think people can never forget how important it is. If I can say so myself. But we were going to talk a
Absolutely.
little bit about proactive
Yes.
versus reactive strategies for classroom management because we are going to use your knowledge as the best way that we
Yeah.
can to understand and delve in, obviously, classroom management. But I would love to know when it comes to classroom management, like, why is it so important to focus on proactive rather than reactive strategies? Hmm.
Yes. So this is something I bring up all the time, and I like to use
I love
visuals.
it.
So we're going to visualize in our head. You are pushing up a mountain, and
Hmm.
you're rolling your snowball up the mountain, or even like a train coming by. It is easier for you to stop the train from starting going than stopping it as it's moving. And I feel like proactive and reactive strategies are the same way. It would be easier for me to stop
Hmm.
or prevent the behavior from happening than trying to put in those reactive strategies once that behavior has happened already. So the proactive or the things that you put in place before the behaviors happen are going to be essential to how that situation occurs and actually what happens. I also feel like it contributes to how quickly you can react to the behaviors and how long they'll
Hmm.
last,
So,
depending
what
on
are
if you
your
can
go
keep up
to
with it.
proactive strategies that teachers can implement?
I love it. Yeah. So, of course, the first is
Hmm.
just, building a relationship. That would include pairing. And that's more than just, saying hi to your kids and giving them a favorites paper at the beginning of the year that you
Yeah,
shove in your desk
yeah.
and never see ever again the rest of the year. It's that constantly building and
Genuine
being
connection.
interested in the interests of your children. Yeah. Like, act like you care. Even fake the funk, but the kids, they know if you care, if you don't care.
Hmm.
So that's obviously my number one go to. Also, too, I think it's just about creating a learning environment that is safe, that's healthy, that children feel like they can trust you, they feel valued, also seen. There are a lot of children who come to school that don't feel like their teachers see them, and they may not get any attention at home. So just putting yourself into the place of that child, I think, is super important. But of course, a couple of my other like go-to proactive is just providing children with choices throughout the day. That could be activities, that could be materials that you use. I know that we have a lot on our plate as educators that we have to get through the day, but it only takes a second to make sure that a child feels like they have some
Hmm.
type of control in their learning. And that's ultimately what we want to teach. We want to make sure that we have a safe place for our children to be able to collaborate with others, to share their ideas and not feel afraid, to say how it is that they feel. You want to make sure that you are being inclusive of the materials and things that you use, making sure the things that we use
Hmm.
represent the children that we serve. And so, again, a lot of it doesn't have to be like material wise. It's just, again, building that relationship with the child and
Hmm.
understanding, where it is that they come from, and what it is
So,
that
of
they need.
course, though, there are times when reactive strategies are necessary. Like, how would you coach teachers to respond effectively when things unfortunately don't go as planned?
Yeah, so
Hmm.
I think the biggest part is just being patient. Some of our children just really need time sometimes to process and understand what it is that we're talking about. If you think about it, I feel like
Yeah.
educators, we are the ones who are rushing, right? We're the ones who have a time limit or a deadline. The children, they don't. So sometimes you have to kind of slow down and look at, okay, let me take a step back. Let me try to process and
Hmm.
understand maybe what the child is going through, and then you want to move on from really making sure you're advocating and supporting that child through the crisis or whatever
Hmm.
behavior that that they're engaging in. An essential portion is just recognizing that the behavior is ultimately communication, right? That's ABA. They're not just randomly jumping off the table there's something that they're actively trying to communicate with you. You just have
Yeah.
to take the time to really figure it out. But just as soon as you take that time and you're compassionate about, the individual and what they're going through, and you can separate the person from the behavior, I think that's when you see that spark, when you don't recognize that behavior as that child, but this is something that they engage in when they need attention or when they need a break. And so maybe it is that I need to give them really good praise for sitting in their chair, or maybe it is something that I need to
Hmm.
do on the back end so that this doesn't happen. But the time to understand, the patience, that also goes into reactive strategies. And of course, if they're crisis plans or specific
Hmm.
interventions, you want to make sure that those are in
Interesting.
place as
I
well.
love what you were saying that like teachers, educators, they do have a time frame, but it's true that the children, they
Yes.
don't know. Sometimes they don't even know that there is a plan. They don't know what's going on, and
Right.
it's so important to give grace, and be
Absolutely.
patient. I love what you just said about practicing patience, because I know how life can get busy, and it can get a bit chaotic, and sometimes we even forget to be kind to ourselves. So I think it's always important to be looking at those
Absolutely.
kids and thinking, maybe one day I was a kid too, and we still have that kid inside of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like we have bad days as well. We as adults, we throw temper tantrums. They don't look the same, but we definitely do some of those
Yes,
same types of behaviors. So, like you said, just being graceful and, the next day, hey, buddy, like it's a new day.
exactly.
We're going to shake off
Yeah,
what happened yesterday. Like, let's move
I
on. Let's
love
pick up
that.
and, yeah, and
Okay, so
move
we'll talk a
forward.
bit. We talked a little bit about inclusive, and I really want to get a little bit more into this topic with you. But I would love, first of all, for you to tell me, what do you define as an inclusive classroom from a behavior analytic perspective?
Perfect. So, I would define a classroom that
Mm-hmm.
has materials, furniture, literature that is representative of the students in the classroom. I think it also means being um, aware
Mm-hmm.
of the challenges that a child may have, and these are the things that they specifically may need in order to promote success for them individually. An inclusive classroom looks like a place where children can, um, again, feel safe. It's a healthy environment. It's filled with positivity and collaboration. And so you just want to create an environment that a child feels like they can come to every day and be able to learn in,
Yeah,
despite what they may be going through
I
in their
really
in
love
their
that.
everyday life.
Um, I know sometimes people talk about budgeting and stuff like that. For a classroom or a school that unfortunately doesn't have the budget, what would be, in your opinion, ways or easy small ways that could make a classroom more inclusive? I know you said furniture. I got curious about that. If you can maybe give us some tips.
Yes. Absolutely. So I may be offering a variety of choices of where my learners can sit. There are some children who do great with, sitting in a regular chair,
Mm,
and some kids absolutely hate sitting in chairs, but maybe they work best standing. Um, I will die on a hill by saying I do not care where my child sits at. I don't care if they hang off of the ceiling, as long as they are doing
yeah.
their work and they're being safe. And so, offering those different types of options in the classroom would definitely make it a more inclusive environment. Like I said, materials would be just, making sure the literature
Hmm.
or the type of text that you use, maybe even like the topics that you guys are studying represent the children, in your classroom. If you have children who of Hispanic cultural background, then you're making
Everybody
sure that
sees. Yeah,
there's
they see
something in there
themselves.
that represents them.
Representation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like the easiest, right, right. The easiest part is just asking. I mean, if you have learners who really can, respond to your questions and really tell
Hmm.
you what they value and of their interests, I think that you could probably just, really engage and inquire, like, hey, like, tell me what's important with you. Like, let's sit down for 10 minutes and tell me what your household looks like. What do you typically eat for dinner? Things like that to really get to show interest and that you care
Yeah,
about their
I feel
learning
like
inside of the
sometimes
classroom.
children, they go into a classroom, and I know how much, like, sorry, how powerful this was for me growing up. Like when I would have teachers that would show that they would care and
Yes,
genuinely like sit down and ask, hey, what's going on? Or tell me a bit of, like, when they go that extra step, you feel seen.
absolutely.
Your relationship with
Yes,
that teacher is completely different
yes.
immediately on the spot, you know? It,
Right. And you can tell too, because these are the teachers where with that child,
yeah,
they have absolutely no problems with that child. But when they go to another teacher's room, they're like cutting up and doing all these things. So you can tell who has taken the time to really form a relationship with that child versus,
absolutely.
the ones who
Yeah,
have kind
yeah.
of pushed them off.
It's
Yeah.
clear as water.
Yeah.
So how do you balance structure and
Yeah.
flexibility when working with like a variety of learning needs, but in one classroom?
Hmm. That probably has to do with planning. Again, I know that educators are asked for a lot. I'm not, asking
Hmm.
anybody to deviate from the requirements of the school because, they still have deadlines. There's still things that they have to do. But, being able to make an inclusive environment, making sure that you're meeting your deadlines and teaching the content you're supposed to teach, it takes a certain amount of really, energy and planning into making sure all of those things are met. And I'm not going to lie and say, for those first several years of me being an educator, I put in a lot of time after school,
Hmm.
before school starts to just really make sure that my kids got what they needed. But I felt like it paid off in the end. I had, a classroom that was well managed. You have improvements in academic grades. You have, less disruptive behaviors, less challenging behaviors. You're actually being
Hmm.
able to teach. Kids are being able to learn. You can see that they're happy, and so those are the things that you're shooting for. But it does take a lot of, for planning. And, after a couple of years, you'll start to have
Yeah,
some things in your bag
you're already wired.
that are already prepared that you can use. So it's like building, yeah, it's like you're building that repertoire, that toolkit of things. And it gets
Amazing.
easier. It really does.
Um, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about one of my favorite things personally, the use of positive reinforcement. Because you see it in so many of our,
Yes.
day to day basis, but I think in a classroom is as well super important.
Hmm.
So I would love to talk about, like, we know that
Yes.
positive reinforcement is obviously a huge part of ABA, but what are some common misconceptions that
Yes.
teachers might have about using reinforcement in the classroom?
Ooh, yeah. So big red flag. Number one thing I normally hear is it's bribery.
Okay.
we're just bribing the kids, and one thing that I do point out is that bribery would be like if they were to
Hmm.
receive whatever that reward or reinforcement is
Hmm.
before not being able to have to work for it. But positive reinforcement is the complete opposite. They're still having to complete a task or maybe engage in a positive behavior or replacement behavior, to do something specific in order to earn that reinforcement. And Mark, it's really funny because
Hmm.
my biggest like go to when I talk about positive reinforcement for educators is, how do you like your job? And they normally say, I love it and things like that. And I said, okay, are you willing to work for free?
Yeah.
Are you willing to go a whole month and teach, do everything that you're
Yeah.
doing and not get a paycheck? How would you feel? And so then it's like, ooh, okay, you're right. I like my job, but
Hmm.
not enough to do this for free. And positive reinforcement is that same way. So, in the classroom, it's not just I'm giving you a Skittle because you sat down. It's I'm giving you high fives and I'm telling you that you're doing a great job doing these different types of things.
Yeah.
And I'm making learning engaging and interactive and fun. And, learning doesn't have to be boring, sitting and reading a textbook. It's let's play a game. And kids are naturally
Absolutely.
reinforced by attention, right?
Hmm.
Positivity, being recognized is reinforcement. There are children who never get to hear great job, right? Like that's super important to a lot of children to hear that they've done something right and
No,
for them
a
to
hundred
start
percent,
reflecting on the
and
things that they've done wrong.
exactly, because I think
So
people are
that's like
super
super
fast to say, "Hey,
important.
you're doing
Yeah.
it wrong," recognizing the wrong, but they're not as fast as recognizing the good. Or we normalize the good,
Correct.
and of course, if something goes wrong, we
Right.
should mention it,
Right.
absolutely. But if something goes right, why not mention it too? I think
Hmm.
in society we're so used to like
Absolutely.
accepting the negative, unfortunately, and then when the positive comes, we go like,
Hmm.
oh, really? Like, we always doubt it. So it is nice to have positive
Right.
reinforcement, and if it starts in the
Right.
classroom, it will
It is.
move onwards to, the rest of your world and the world that you build. So yeah.
Yes. Yes. And at some point, it'll become natural too that, a child doesn't need to be
Hmm.
reinforced by like something like a Skittle or a high five. They will naturally do things because they want
Hmm.
to see whoever it is happy, or they know it's the right thing to do. It switches over from like being an artificial outside kind of temporary reinforcement to naturally feeling like
Hmm.
I'm going to do the right thing because I like to do it. And that's what I want to do. And so that's what you want to see transition over. And like you said, everybody likes to feel rewarded or celebrated, or
Hmm.
to
Amazing.
recognize when you're doing a good
Okay, so
job.
can you share an example, for example, as like of a time when implementing a strong reinforcement system made a significant impact on a student or a classroom?
Absolutely. I have probably implemented dozens of different types of token economy systems, positive reinforcement through relationship building, maybe through check-in and check-outs. I had a particular student who was
Hmm.
really struggling academically, and I really felt like his teachers were not
Okay.
being compassionate of his situation. And so I went into the classroom. I kind of did my natural observations. I saw kind of the way that they interacted, and things like that, and realized, the child was very heavily reinforced by just attention. I'm not sure if they did not receive it at home, or, you just never know. So when I had my kind of feedback conversation with the educator, I challenged her. I said, I want you to change the way
Hmm.
that you communicate with this student. I want you to take a second before you address behaviors. I want you to really try your best this entire day to point out just one thing that this child has done right, and see what they do. And I think that the child was so used to being
Mm.
um, punished, you know, so used to being pointed out the things of being a
Yeah.
bad child, of being labeled as this disruptive child. I think he honestly was thrown back that they were even saying anything nice to them. And so, okay, so after that, I said, okay, I want you to do it again, but now I want you to do two things.
Hmm.
Find two ways to reinforce this child. To find something to say, and it just gradually grew over the next couple of weeks. And so, you look back in a month, I come back and observe this child is sitting, they're doing their work. I'm seeing less disruptive behaviors. He's looking to the teacher for attention, positive attention, and now this teacher and this child has a more positive relationship, a more understanding. Now the child can feel trusting and feel like they can come up to the teacher and say, hey, look, like I'm not having a good day, like
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my work, but I'm not gonna say anything. Just, I'm just gonna give you a heads up and let you know. But again, it that didn't cost anything.
Yeah.
She didn't have to go out of her way to plan anything. All she had to do was pay attention.
Hmm.
That was it. And that's free.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a win-win. No cost,
Yeah.
better student,
Well, you did your
better cost
magic. You did
management.
your
Like,
magic. I mean, everybody worked a little bit of their magic.
yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I feel like you're telling this story, and it
yeah.
just breaks my heart to, people that unfortunately, or especially in this case, kids that, they're immediately labeled as a quote unquote bad kid. And I'm like, don't give up on people. Like,
Yes.
try and find different ways. Like, there's good in
Right.
everyone. Just
Right.
try and figure out what's the best way to get to this kid.
Absolutely.
Um, so
Right. Right. Right.
okay, so, and how can teachers ensure that this type of reinforcement remains effective over the course of, the class or their journey in that school? How do you think you can maintain it?
Yeah. I would say I think it's constantly
Mm-hmm.
evaluating, reevaluating what your kids need, right? Just like behaviors change, our motivators change, things that we wanted before may change versus next week. So it's constantly being interested in what your children are interested in. Maybe they liked Pokemon a few months ago, but
Yeah,
Pokemon's no longer, popular anymore. So we've moved on to Dragon Ball Z. So, it's kind of like I would say staying hip, but you're staying
yeah,
engaged. Hey, like what are you guys watching on TV these days? What music is cool? Because if you can keep up with
exactly.
what's reinforcing the kids, then you can constantly provide that as, positive reinforcement for the things that you want. So
I
yeah,
love it.
you got to stay open.
Exactly. Keep
Be
yourself in the
flexible,
in the know. I love this, like keeping in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
in like what's new, because it always reminds me of Mean Girls, the movie, and when the mom goes, "So what's the 411?" and it's just like, at least she's trying to keep herself in the loop.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Right. It's silly. It feels silly, but then they're like, dang, Miss Lewis, like she's really trying to like, find out what we really like,
Yeah.
and it's
Oh,
it's
believe me,
funny,
they'll
but
laugh, but
it's
they'll
pretty
love
cool
it. Like,
too.
at least, you're trying to keep up with the lingo
Right.
and just keep up with what they're saying now and what are the expressions and everything. So I love
Yeah.
it. Okay, so
Right.
we'll talk about now something a little bit different, but I would love to talk a little bit about de-escalation
Okay.
and crisis strategies because it's something that as well is part of this environment. But I would love to know what are some
Yes.
early warning signs that a student may be escalating toward a behavioral crisis.
Yeah. So some common ones I've seen is,
Okay.
a child who's shutting down, maybe physical and verbal task refusal, like they've just completely stopped complying. You see children who may, before they aggress, they start to kind of ball
Mm,
their fist up. Maybe they're shaking, visibly kind of shaking. Some children may kind of pace back and forth. It's kind of like they're amping themselves up. And so you kind of want to look for those things, stomping away at the feet, starting to get loud with
hmm.
whatever they're saying. They're getting louder and louder. You want to look for those kind of trigger signs, right? And you know that, okay, either I need to do something now before
Yeah.
this turns into a bigger situation. And that's where, those prevention strategies, proactive stuff is really important because, again,
Hmm.
am I going to stop the train as it's moving, or am I going to try to
Yeah.
stop it before it pulls off the train station? So if you start to see that, that's your cue. Like, okay, let's shut this
So
down
if
and figure out
for
what's going
anybody
on.
who's listening to us, that's a teacher or BCBA, whatever the case might be, or even a parent in this case, like who could be somebody who could be in the classroom and be in that moment. What are some quick actionable de-escalation techniques that you would recommend that teachers can use in that moment?
Yeah. So this phrase that we used to
Okay.
use was stay in your car, CAR. So the C stands for I'm staying calm. Okay. I'm not going to match the
Mm-hmm.
attitude or tone of voice of the student. I'm not going to match, the actions that they're doing. I'm observing, I'm taking a step back, and I myself am staying calm. My tone of voice, how I look, how I'm responding to things. Do I need to lower my voice? Do I need to watch my hands? Are my hands coming off
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
that, I want to tussle
Mm-hmm.
now. So, staying calm. The A is aware. And again, that's just being very observant of your environment. Are there things I need to remove? Is this child
Mm-hmm.
somebody who will try to throw something? Do I have to sanitize the environment and make sure that the environment is safe? Do I need to clear the room? Is it a danger for other children now to be in here? So I'm being aware of the situation, how close or far I am from the student, things like that. And then the last one I feel like is most important is the R, and that's respectful. So in my case, it's I don't care what you say to me. I'm going to remain respectful. I'm going to keep the same neutral voice. I'm going to talk to you in a very calm voice to kind of get you to come back down and see that we're not enemies. I'm on your side. Whatever you need from me, I'm willing to listen so that you can tell me and I can provide it for you. So you're saying calm, aware,
I
and
love
respectful.
that.
Stay in your car.
Like I never heard of it, and I
Yeah.
think it beautifully
Yeah.
like I don't know I don't know how I can say, but yeah, I think it just describes exactly. It's such a good way of assessing the, yeah, 100%. I
It's
love it.
easy.
Um, so,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, so how do you then? Because obviously you have the car mindset, right? But imagine that it obviously could escalate. It might not work, but how do you help teachers shift their mind from a punitive mindset to one that then prioritize de-escalation
Mhm.
and relationship building, like we talked about?
Right. I think just like kind of like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to de escalating a situation that has
Hmm.
the potential to be bigger, hopefully you have a relationship with this child, but understanding again that the
Yeah.
behavior and the child are two separate things so that I can focus on the behavior itself, not the child engaging in the behavior. So if I can find out, okay, this behavior is happening, right? They are trying to communicate something to me, even though it's,
Mm-hmm.
disruptive or destructive or dangerous. There's something they're trying to say. If I can get educators to shift their mind to think about the behavior instead of the person, normally it presents a better understanding, because then I can
Mm-hmm.
disconnect that this child is not bad, but that they need something and that they're really struggling trying to tell me. So when it comes to de-escalation, like I said, you're building their relationship. Of course, making sure interventions and strategies are in place to react towards those things. That could be removing the demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm no longer asking you to sit down anymore. That's, null and void. Maybe it's, okay, you need a break or a snack or water. Sometimes it's, I'm going to be quiet. I'm about to shut up and I'm going to let you tear this screen up
Mm-hmm.
and get it out. That's hard. That's hard for
Yeah.
educators. They really push back on that one. But, sometimes I'm like, maybe let's step back. He's having a bad day.
Yeah.
Let him get it out. I'm gonna let him get it out. Once he's done with that, okay,
Mm-hmm.
now you can focus. Now we can talk, right? But pulling back, like I said, being compassionate. I see you destroying that book, but you really but you're crying when you're
Upset.
doing it.
Yeah.
Something obviously is making you very upset. Something's making you sad, and I want to know what
Mm-hmm.
it is whenever you're ready to tell me. So I don't feel like it's technically like intervention strategies. It's just about the way that you approach the crisis in itself. Now, of course, if things get dangerous or out of hand, there are things you should obviously put in place according to their plans. You definitely want to make sure you follow those things. But I feel like if you really try to start off on a good foot by, again, understanding what the
Mm-hmm.
behavior may be, communicating to you, then you can give that child what it is that they need, even if
Yeah.
it's nothing at
Wow.
all at the moment.
This was a journey. This topic, because it's an intense one, but I think it's one that definitely needs to be talked about. Because
Yeah,
unfortunately, like there's so many emotions, and then so many factors around a child
absolutely.
that it can happen. And
Yeah,
it's nice. Hopefully, this will be able to
it
help
is. It is.
whoever ends
Yeah.
up in that situation. But I wanted to move on a little bit about data collection and its role in classroom management, just so
Okay.
whoever's listening to us can as well get a little bit of more
Yeah.
insight from your perspective and your knowledge. But there's a lot of like educators that unfortunately they struggle with data collection. But I would love from you to hear from
Yes.
you, what are some simple but effective ways that teachers can collect meaningful behavior data, but without feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah. I like that because, as an educator, you get that
Yeah.
big old binder with all those IEPs and they're like, okay, here, go for it. And you're like, I've never
Yeah.
collected data. Like, what am I supposed to do? So, of course, you start out by organizing what you need to collect data
Mhm.
on and what type of data you need to collect on, right? Some of my go-tos, because most of the time when you have data in, educational setting, it's normally like either frequency or duration, right? So either how
Mhm.
often it's happening or how long. So my go-tos, because another thing is you want to make collecting data seem very seamless, but also too, you don't want to be walking around in a child's face like,
Yeah.
oop, you did this, oop, you didn't do that. So there are some ways to be discreet, right? A pocket full of marbles. Every time a child engages in a behavior, maybe that I'm targeting, I'm taking a marble from one pocket and
Mhm.
I'm moving it to the other pocket, right? And then I know at the end of that hour, maybe to check the
I
other
love
pocket again,
that. I never
okay, how
thought
many
of that.
marbles are in there? Yeah. Yeah, same thing with rubber bands. I've heard like if you have a wrist full of rubber bands or like the hair scrunchies, move it from one side to the other. That's another great way of collecting data. And of course, with time you can use timers. The sand little timers that you turn over, the sand sprinkles down. They've made some really good advancements in timers and how cool they look and how creative they look. So lots of different
Uh
ways to
huh.
collect data duration wise that look pretty presentable. But it doesn't have to be big and scary. And, there are lots of different ways to collect data that are
Mhm.
discreet and will get you
I
what you
love
need.
that.
So
Yeah,
those
I
are like
mean,
my
because I'm
go-tos.
thinking with, for example, even digital
Yeah.
data collection, an iPad is such like a day-to-day device that people have, that it can be very inclusive in the
Yes.
classroom, as in very discreet, even like a phone, whatever device might
Absolutely.
be. So the
Yeah.
the children doesn't
Hmm.
understand.
And
But
And you're right. I mean, I feel like more these days, data collection is definitely
mhm,
moving towards technology and electronics, which I think is a great thing. It's easily accessible. It's fast. You can update it. There are lots of
mhm,
different programs out there that allow you to collect data like Motivity in real
yeah,
time, to where you're seeing these things. You can look at the data collected in another classroom. So I definitely feel like if you have
mm,
a way to
hundred
collect data
percent.
electronically, use it. I mean, if it'll make it
Yeah,
easier for
why
you, if you
not?
can see
Exactly.
results,
So,
why
how
not?
can data help
Yeah,
teachers identify patterns and improve the classroom management strategies?
yeah, absolutely. So, if I'm collecting data on a specific behavior, which by the
Yeah.
way, when you collect data, it's not always collecting data on how often a child throws a
Hmm.
chair. It could be how often they raise their hand or how long they're able to sit into, a chair. But looking at that data point, you want to be able to analyze and see, okay, are there any changes that I need to make because maybe
Hmm.
the child is not making progress as it looks like on the data. Maybe they're regressing, they're not really hitting their target as often. So I'm now analyzing, I'm making modifications to see what can I do so that this child is more successful in whatever this goal is. It definitely helps to shape to any changes that you need to make in data collection, because you may be using one method of data collection, and you find out that either you're not
Yeah,
getting what you need, or it's just hard, right? It's just taking too much time to do. So then it's like, okay, I need to switch and do something a little easier. So there's lots of different things that you can get out, lots of results you can get off of analyzing the data that you've collected on a target
I
behavioral
love
skill
it.
that you have for a
Interesting.
child.
Do you have a favorite success story where like data collection played an important role?
It seems like every day in the clinical and obviously
Hmm.
I feel like educational setting wise, my success story is collecting data on a target skill or behavior, right? Making a beautiful graph, and then at the IEP meeting, I'm presenting that
Yeah.
graph as a visual, right, representation of the work that the child has done. And we can sit here and talk numbers all day, but nothing beats seeing
Yes.
that line, right, go up, like increase up, and just seeing like the joy on a parent's face to say, hey, like,
A
this
hundred
is where our
percent.
friend was at
Yeah.
moments ago, but look, like they're way up here. Yeah, like it's just, that is super motivating to think, okay, like
Hmm.
I helped this child go from here to there, and their parents are now happy about these things. So I'm
Let's
really
pull the
big on
graph.
that. Like,
Yeah.
let's pull the graph.
I love it.
Like, let's
Listen,
see what your
and
child's
we
achieving.
love
Yeah,
data,
yeah,
so obviously graphs will love it too. Yeah, I think
yeah,
it just that experience of having someone come from the outside, which is obviously the parents, right? Because they're not every single day in the classroom, and of course they see the difference of their child's
right,
behavior when they come home, but then just being able to have the data to back it up
yeah,
and show it and then show, look at the progress, it's here,
right,
like data cannot lie, it's here, and it's fantastic. It must be like
right,
little goosebump moments, right? It probably is. Yeah, I love it.
yeah, yeah. Like that mini report card that comes home that you want to, put on your refrigerator. You're like, look at these graphs
You
that
like,
I'm
you
doing.
frame it, honestly, frame those graphs.
Yes,
So
right.
and
Yeah,
I want to shift a little bit out of data collection now, but to go into one of my other favorite things, which is I'm very very big on community, and Motivity is huge on community too, because we are very firm believers of the power of collaboration. So now I want to talk a little bit of collaboration inside the classroom,
right.
because you know, classroom management isn't just about the
Yeah.
teacher, but it takes a whole team. So I would love to hear from you a little bit on how can teachers, BCBAs, and even other professionals can work together to create a supportive environment.
Yeah. So in the
Hmm.
classroom, I think that's a good starting point that you said that, it's not just about the educators. Your
Yes.
collaboration really should start in home. So, as a teacher, I want to be
Hmm.
able to give you what you need as a student. And I won't know what you need unless you say something, or, unless I know. So my collaboration is, okay, I'm having conversations with my students. I'm inquiring what it is that they need from me. How can I be a good educator? What ways do you learn best? How can I teach this lesson to where
Hmm.
you are interactive and engaged? what activities do you like to do? And so I'm now collaborating because ultimately, the success of the child is, primarily up to them. So if they are responsible for their
Exactly.
success,
Yeah.
then I want to be involved in that, right? And then outside of that classroom, I'm moving to educators, right? Like, okay, you have this child the first 3 blocks, I have this child the last 3 blocks. This really works with me. You should
Hmm.
probably try this, when they're with you.
Yeah.
And then let's go a step further. My child also receives physical therapy,
Hmm.
ABA therapy, services, as well as maybe occupational therapists. So now, hey, I'm, contacting these other health modalities, health professionals,
Yeah.
and saying, hey, look, we share this kid. Let's get to work. Like, what are we gonna do? These are the issues I'm
Yeah.
having. What issues are you, what things are
Yeah.
you working on? Let's
Definitely.
figure it
Oh,
out. Yeah, there's
100%.
like
It
layers,
it
right?
in the good old saying, it takes a village,
Yeah.
but as well it takes a communication. You know, transparency,
Yes.
good communication, humbleness
Yes.
as well. With people being like, because sometimes I know people can
Yes.
be like, no, like I'm only staying in my lane. I'm only doing this. I only believe in this. And sometimes getting a little bit out of the dark and getting to know a
Yeah.
little bit of what your colleague is doing, just so you have a little bit of that insight. I think that is brings a lot
Right.
of richness to it as well on the collaborative side.
And I'm glad you brought that up because you're right. When it comes to, collaborating care, there are individuals where, they don't get to come together to really network and communicate
Hmm.
about a student. And you leave these gaps, right? Which is a disservice to the child because
Hmm.
ultimately that's our job is to serve the child. So, at some point you have to kind of take yourself off the pedestal and
Yeah.
say, okay, what's best for this child? Not what makes me feel good as a professional, but do I need to contact this professional because they know
Yeah.
more than I do? Or maybe they really could help, in some way. So I'm going to
Yeah.
be open to
Openness for
receive and
sure.
also give.
So,
So, yes.
Ashley, what do you think
Yeah.
are some ways that BCBAs
Yeah.
could support teachers, but without making the teachers feel like they are losing their autonomy, or that their autonomy is being taken away?
Yeah. I think honestly, the biggest part
Hmm.
is being open to listen instead of going into a classroom
Yeah.
to dish out demands and directives. I think that there is a stigma and a misunderstanding that BCBAs come into the classroom and, we're not
Hmm.
trying to listen to what the teachers have to say, that we're just coming in there to control things. But I feel like the biggest portion is saying, hey, I serve this kid
Yeah.
as well. How can I help you? Not the other way around. What is it that I can do to help your situation? And being open to listening to them talk 30 minutes about their concerns and really trying to find a resolution to those things. I feel like the partnership and collaboration would happen naturally if people really kind of laid their
Yeah.
boundaries down. And like I said,
Hmm.
sometimes it's okay to just be quiet, right? Just to listen and say, like, I understand
Yeah.
you. Like, I get exactly what you're going through.
Yeah.
Okay, let's figure it out. Like, what are we going to
Because people
do?
sometimes, like,
So, yes,
I spoke
absolutely.
this the other day with a friend of mine, and we even and then even on a podcast, I said this, and I'll say it again. I think when people don't know things, and I think it's a very human reaction, we build our walls up, right? And we have that little resistance of being like, I
Right,
don't
right,
I don't want anybody else in my environment. I don't want you to come here on my territory. And I think, like, it's way beyond. Yeah,
right,
exactly. But it goes
right.
beyond that,
Leave my
because it's what you were
classroom.
saying. Like, we're here to serve the
Yeah,
children. Like, we're here to better them and help them in the best way that we can. So it's kind of hard to have an ego
right.
in that situation, right? I mean, it will only break the
Yes.
mission, I believe. So,
Right, right, right. Which
mhm.
will always that should be on the forefront of our
Yeah.
mind is okay. What are we doing for this kid? But you're right.
Hmm.
It's just like you got to push that to
So,
the
what's
side.
one piece
Right,
of advice that you'd give now to the educators who want to collaborate better with behavior analysts? Because I again, like we were saying, there's people that are resistant, but there's people that really are amazing as well and open, and and sometimes resistance goes away because it's just sometimes it's human. The initial shock, you're a bit overwhelmed, but there are people that want to collaborate. So, what would be your advice to those who want to collaborate, and how can teachers as well collaborate better with behavior analysts? Okay,
yeah, I would say be flexible. ABA is again not a one-stop
so
magician. Some things
hmm
work, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes it takes trials and time and revisions and modifications and things like that. And so I kind of feel like, as BCBAs, we're used to that flexibility, but educators are not. So if I can
Hmm.
get you to understand, hey, look, just ride with me. Like, let's just do this journey together. We're gonna get through it together. We're gonna get, hit any bumps, and we're gonna ride through and problem solve together. If you could just stick with me through
Hmm.
this, we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. So
Yeah.
just be flexible. Just be open for change. Be open for feedback. Be open for revisions and things like that. And the same thing with the educators. It's
Hmm.
again, just be open to receive that. Just because I may give you feedback about your implementation of a specific strategy is not a shot at your character or your degree that you've worked so hard to earn. It's as a professional and expert in behavior or classroom management, these are suggestions that I would recommend that you try
Hmm.
if you'd like to see some type of improvements in your class. And like you said, just that ego. It's not that a BCBA is more superior than a teacher
Yeah.
or otherwise. We're on the same playing field because again, our common focus is the child. So let's think
Exactly.
about all of
Yeah,
that.
I
Let's
love it.
do it. Yeah.
Honestly, Ashley, like, we're almost at the end, but it's just been so nice conversing with you. It just
Yeah.
feels like I learned a lot. I'm pretty sure that people that are listening will learn a lot too. But I think you're just a natural.
Yeah.
Like, I can
Oh,
definitely see
thank you.
how you got where you at. So I'm honestly like, so honestly, I
Thank you.
will use the word blessed to have you, you know, bumped into you, and obviously Adam, who is one of our incredible team members at Motivity.
Yes.
He brought us
Yes.
together, and I am so happy because like you're honestly such a beautiful source of information, and just your journey is so incredible. Um,
Thank you.
to finish it off, I would love
Thank
to
you.
ask
Thank
you
you.
if you could give a piece of advice to whoever is listening, a teacher or professional, like who are struggling with a classroom management. What would it be?
I think I would say, and this is also speaking
Hmm.
to myself, the younger version of myself as a teacher, would be
Yeah,
to continue to keep learning, right? It doesn't matter if you're in year one or if you're year 10, education is changing. Children are not the same as they were
yeah,
30 years ago. Curriculum is not the same. You have to be flexible and adaptable enough to go with the flow. And so, as things change, you have to be open to continue learning new things, new books, new curriculum, new strategies to use. It's that strategy that you've used the
yeah.
last 5 years, it may not work this sixth year. And so I got to be honest to say, you know what, even though like I really like doing that, it's just I'm gonna have to
Hmm.
figure something else out and be okay with that. It's okay to change, to do something different. So, be open to learning, be okay with being adaptable, moving as you see fit,
I love
and
that, honestly.
continue to keep
Like,
learning.
really,
So
really beautiful words.
yeah.
So, Ashley, I am not going to
Thank you.
gatekeep you. Okay, I want people to know who you are. But of course, I would love to know, or for
Yes.
you to tell us, where can people connect with you and learn more about your work? Because I know you have books, and your TikTok is on fire, your Instagram is on fire
Yes.
too. But where can people find you, and what's new? Do you have anything that's coming out soon? Anything you're working on?
Yeah. Super excited. So yes, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok, and it's at the Brown Behaviorista, just like the barista that you see at Starbucks that makes your coffees. So the Brown Behaviorista, my website is the same. It's www.thebrownbehaviorista. I'm super excited. I do have
Amazing.
some projects coming up. Like Mark said, I've released a set of social stories, and so I do plan
Nice.
on releasing a few more this year. So super excited about those things. And kind of stay tuned because there's some other things that may be coming out, that may be dropped. I definitely do a lot of community events. I'm located south of Atlanta, so I definitely would kind of check in through those
Yay.
pages and
We're
kind
so
of see what's
excited,
in
and we'll be
store.
here to follow your journey.
Yeah,
Ashley, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Like,
thank
it's
you.
been honestly a pleasure, like, to have you here,
I
and
appreciate
we
you.
feel so blessed to, have your expertise come on. So thank you so much for taking the time to joining us today. Everyone, please go follow the Brown Behaviorista.
Thank you.
She's incredible. Ashley Lewis, you always can learn so much from her.
Thank
And
you.
guys, we'll
Thank
catch you on
you.
the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Mark, and I'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.